This is Wednesday's devotional, April the 21st, and the title of this devotional commentary is The Deaths of Miriam and Aaron. Our scripture reading is one chapter of Numbers, and that is Numbers chapter 20. Now, although it's not stated in the scriptures, the events recorded in Numbers 20 marked the 40th year of Israel's wanderings in the wilderness since the people departed Egypt. Now, fulfilling God's judgment, the desert had become a graveyard for the children of Israel who were 20 years old and older when they refused to cross over into the promised land. Now, entered upon the 40th year, a whole generation had perished. All those that had come out of Egypt that were 20 years and older had all perished with the exception of Joshua and Caleb, and today we'll record two others who will die, and that will be Miriam, the sister of Moses and Aaron, as well as Aaron, the first high priest. Now, a comment. I've experienced times of sorrow and disappointments in life that washed over me like the waves of a storm, testing my heart, my soul, and my strength. And Numbers 20 was certainly a time like that for Moses, that great servant of the Lord, one with whom he spoke face to face with Moses, experienced in this chapter the deaths of his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron. Now, Numbers 20 and verse 1, and only verse 1, mentions the death of Miriam. Now, she was the oldest of the three siblings, her brothers being Aaron and Moses. But her dying garnered very little attention in the scriptures. In fact, we read this. Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month. And the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Numbers 20 and verse 1. Now that was all that is said. Israel had been at Kadesh before in Numbers 13 and verse 26. This was the place that they had made the fateful decision to turn back. And 38 years later, they now come to Kadesh again. And it was at Kadesh where we read Miriam died there and was buried. There is no mention of a season of mourning or a memorial service. It's simply and abruptly Miriam died and was buried. Now I'll come back to that thought in a moment. Now Numbers 20 verses 2 through 13 records a sad moment in Israel's history. Now 40 years after leaving Egypt. And yet we find the old adage goes, like father, like son, is seen in Kadesh. Their fathers before them had rebelled, and the new generation encamped on the border of Canaan took up the same pattern of sin, and they quarreled with Moses, and they spake, saying, Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. Now, did the people wish to die? Of course not. But their quarrel with Moses evidenced not only their lack of respect for him as the leader of the nation, but a spirit of rebellion that was expressed in their murmuring and complaining about a lack of water. Kadesh was indeed a place that was destitute. However, it was not their destination. They must need pass through this desert place called Kadesh to make their journey to the promised land. Well, Moses and Aaron left the congregation and they're murmuring and went to the door to the tabernacle. And we read that they fell on their faces in verse 6. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. The Lord then directed Moses to take a rod in his hand and assemble the people and speak to the rock and the people watching. And God promised the rock, it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. Well, Moses obeyed the Lord in taking the rod and going to the rock. But he had become exasperated with the people and their sins, and he rebuked them in anger. And rather than speak to the rock as God had commanded him to do, he struck the rock. Not once, but twice. We read in verse 11 that he lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rod twice, and the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and the beast also. And some might observe, well, all is well that ends well. However, that was not the case. You see, God is not only interested in the outcome, he is also invested in the process. Let me say that again. God is not only interested in the outcome, he is also interested and invested in the process. He had directed Moses to speak to the rock, but Moses instead had chosen to strike the rock twice in anger. Now, why is this an important lesson? Well, we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and we won't have time to study it, but the rock was a type or a representation of Jesus Christ. Now, the judgment of God that followed Moses striking the rock seems severe. But you have to remember that God is jealous of his testimony, and his servants had failed to obey him. The Lord had not received the glory for the water that burst forth from the rock. And Moses and Aaron had sinned against the Lord in the sight of all the people, and their lack of faith, we read in Numbers 20 and verse 12, "Ye believe me not." Moses and Aaron's lack of faith was the catalyst for God's judgment. Verse 12 we read, "Ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them." Tragedy. Moses and Aaron will both die just short of crossing over. Now verses 14 through 21 gives us a story about the Edomites being ancestors of Israel. Esau was the father of the Edomites. Esau was the brother of Jacob, the son of Isaac, and his grandfather was Abraham. And so there was a kindredship between the Edomites and the Israelites. But as Moses goes to them, and he requests for Israel to pass through their land, which would have been a direct route into the promised land, the Edomites absolutely refused. And they forced Israel to go another way. Consequences of that will come up in another chapter. Now, let's look also as we close. At the beginning of Numbers 20, Miriam, the sister of Moses, died. At the end of Numbers 20, Aaron, the brother of Moses, dies. Now, he was the first high priest. And unlike it was with Miriam, where there's simply the message, Miriam died, for Aaron, there was set aside 30 days of mourning and a great ceremony. We read in Numbers 20 and verse 28 and 29 that Moses was told for he and Aaron and the son Eleazar to go up to the mount, and they did. And there Moses stripped Aaron of his high priestly garments, and he put them upon Eleazar his son. And we read in Numbers 20 and verse 28, "And Aaron died in the top of the mount." Moses and Aaron's son Eleazar then came down from the mount. This time he's wearing the breastplate of the high priest. And the people realized that Aaron was dead. And for the next 30 days, all Israel mourned Aaron's death. You know, Aaron, like the best of men, was far from perfect. However, he was the man God had chosen as the first high priest of Israel. When Eleazar came down from the mount wearing the garments of the high priest, and Aaron was not with Moses, the people mourned his death for 30 days. So it is with every generation and with all men and women. You see, my days and your days are numbered. In Psalm 90 and verse 12 we read, "So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." I encourage you to do that today. You are not promised tomorrow, but you have today. Won't you serve the Lord and give him your heart and make this a day that counts for eternity? God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.